have you ever wondered why, after so many centuries, the Jewish people still don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah? With so many prophecies and expectations, how could someone who performed miracles, preached love, and transformed history still be rejected by those who were eagerly waiting for his arrival? What lies behind this decision that spans generations? Today, we're going to dive deep into this intriguing question and uncover the real reasons behind this rejection. Reasons that go far beyond what you might think. From the days of Moses, through the reigns of kings like David and Solomon, the Jewish people have been eagerly awaiting the fulfillment of these promises. From childhood, they were taught to expect a leader who would raise up the throne of David, defeat their enemies, govern with justice, and restore the glory of Israel. The prophecies, scattered throughout the scriptures, describe this Messiah as a powerful king, an invincible conqueror who would bring liberation. The Messiah is not just seen as a spiritual leader, but as someone who would reverse the course of history. He would be the man to turn suffering into triumph, bringing long-awaited redemption to a people who, for centuries, had borne the weight of slavery, exile, and persecution. The hope for this Messiah is what keeps the spirit of the people alive, especially during the darkest of times. However, this hope also carries high expectations. The people expect a strong liberator, capable of leading armies, toppling empires, and restoring the glory of Israel on earth. This promise of the Messiah is like a flame that never extinguishes, burning brightly in the heart of every Jew, even when everything around them seems to be falling apart. And so, the Jewish people continue to wait, waiting for the moment when the Messiah will finally come to bring redemption, restore the kingdom, and fulfill the ancient promises made by God. But while the flame of hope remains alive, the reality around them is brutal. The Roman Empire rules with an iron fist, and each day feels like a cruel reminder that liberation is still far off. The streets are filled with Roman soldiers, the taxes are heavy, and daily life is marked by the fear of reprisals. The Promised Land, which once flourished under the reigns of David and Solomon, is now under the control of a foreign power that shows no respect for the faith, traditions, or identity of the Jewish people. The yearning for a Messiah, therefore, intensifies. But this isn't just a spiritual longing. It's a desperate cry for justice, for freedom, for vengeance against their oppressors. The people aren't just looking for a religious leader. They want a warrior, an earthly king who will free them from the Roman yoke, lead an army, and restore David's throne in Jerusalem. With each failed revolt against Rome, with each prophet who rises and falls, the desire for this Messiah only grows stronger. They are tired of empty promises and leaders who fail to fulfill the destiny they expected. The Roman occupation only reinforces the belief that the Messiah must be more than just a preacher of peace. He needs to be a liberator, someone who will bring an end to the oppression once and for all. But time seems to drag on slowly. The years pass, and the people continue to ask, "Where is the Messiah? Why hasn't God sent us the deliverer yet?" Meanwhile, Rome's power appears unbreakable, and the hopes for divine intervention grow with each passing day. They wait, watching every sign, analyzing every movement. Any charismatic figure that emerges raises suspicions and, at the same time, hopes. Maybe he is the chosen one. Maybe he is the Messiah. And it is in this anxious waiting that the ancient prophecies come back to life. The sacred scriptures, the Tanakh, contain the words of the prophets, who describe the Messiah in ways that further ignite the imagination of the people. One of these prophecies, perhaps the most well-known, is in the words of the prophet Isaiah. The Messiah will be a descendant of King David, someone who will bring justice and peace. He will govern with wisdom, protect the oppressed, and establish a kingdom that will never end. Other prophets, like Jeremiah and Micah, also paint the picture of a triumphant king, someone who will unite the scattered tribes of Israel and restore the nation's greatness. Ezekiel speaks of a shepherd who will care for the lost flock, gathering those who were scattered during the exile. There is a common vision. The Messiah won't just be any leader but a powerful king, chosen by God, who will bring both spiritual and political redemption. These prophecies create specific expectations. The people aren't just waiting for any Messiah, but one who fits perfectly into this image. someone who, in an instant, will reverse centuries of suffering and exile, defeat their enemies, and restore the kingdom of Israel in all its glory. They are waiting for a golden age, a time when swords will be turned into plowshares and peace will reign on earth. But there's more. The scriptures speak of miracles, of heavenly signs that will accompany the arrival of the Messiah. The people's eyes are always alert, watching for these signs. They imagine a leader so powerful that even the forces of nature will bow to his will. To many, the Messiah will be the embodiment of God's power on earth, performing grand feats that leave no doubt about his identity. And so, the Jewish people keep their eyes on the scriptures, interpreting every word, searching for clues. They read and reread the prophecies, discussing their meaning in synagogues and homes, trying to unravel the mystery of when and how this Messiah will appear. Then, Jesus of Nazareth appears. He doesn't come with armies, nor does he wear a crown of gold. Instead of appearing as a powerful king, he comes as a humble carpenter, walking through villages and towns, preaching about love, forgiveness, and the kingdom of God. He heals the sick, raises the dead, and teaches with authority. But he doesn't seek earthly thrones or glory. Instead of marching against Rome, he speaks of a kingdom that is not of this world. For many Jews, this is perplexing. How can this simple man be the Messiah? Where is the military power? Where are the signs of political liberation? Jesus doesn't fit the traditional image of the Messiah they had been waiting for all this time. They expected a leader who would defeat their enemies with strength. But Jesus preaches peace, humility, and surrender to God. And his actions? He reaches out to sinners, the poor, the marginalized, exactly the ones society usually shuns. To many religious leaders, this is incomprehensible. In their view, a Messiah should restore the holiness of Israel, driving out sin and sinners. Yet, Jesus doesn't condemn those on the fringes. Instead, he welcomes them, forgives them, and draws them closer to God. This gap between expectations and reality becomes a stumbling block. Many Jews wonder, if he really is the Messiah, why isn't he overthrowing the thrones of the powerful? Why isn't he leading a revolution against the Romans? They expect clear signs of power and victory, but what they see is a man who refuses to use violence and who speaks of loving even one's enemies. And so, for many, Jesus' presence is baffling. He challenges deeply ingrained expectations about what the Messiah should be. Some follow him, believing there's something divine in his words and actions, but for most, he seems like just another in a long line of prophets who came, promised liberation, but didn't fulfill the messianic hopes the people longed to see realized. But then, something even more challenging happens. Jesus begins to speak about his own divinity. He doesn't just suggest that he is the Messiah. He claims to be the Son of God, in a literal and profound sense. For the Jewish people, this statement is an absolute shock. Monotheism is at the heart of Jewish faith. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The belief in one, indivisible God is sacred and unquestionable. The idea that a man could claim a direct and unique connection with God is, for many, nothing short of blasphemy. Jesus' teachings about his divine nature are seen as a threat to the central foundation of Judaism. For the religious leaders, especially the Pharisees and Sadducees, his words sound like a violation of the most sacred laws. How could a human being, born of flesh and blood, claim to be one with God? This is something inconceivable to a community whose faith has always been rooted in an invisible, untouchable God, completely separate from human creation. Moreover, the laws of Moses, given directly by God, are clear. Idolatry, the worship of anything or anyone other than God, is a grave sin. So, the very idea that a man, no matter how wise or miraculous, could be worshipped as divine is unacceptable to many. The response from much of the Jewish community is not just a rejection of Jesus as the Messiah, but a condemnation of his claims as dangerous heresies that could lead the people away from the true God. For the religious leaders, the situation becomes even more urgent. If Jesus' word spread, it could not only corrupt the Jewish faith, but also provoke a harsher reaction from the Romans, who do not tolerate religious unrest. So, Protecting the people from what they consider to be false doctrine becomes a critical mission. They see Jesus as a threat, not only to religious order but also to the political stability of the nation. This claim to divinity, therefore, creates a deep division. While some begin to see something beyond a simple prophet in Jesus, for most, his words seem like an offense to the core of their faith. But the real shock for many comes when Jesus speaks of his own fate, not of glory, but of suffering. He begins to say that the Son of Man must suffer, be rejected, and even be killed. For those expecting a triumphant Messiah, these words are incomprehensible. A Messiah who dies? A Messiah who doesn't lead armies to victory but submits to suffering and death? This seems to contradict everything they had expected. The Jewish people were expecting a strong Messiah, a liberator who would defeat their enemies, not someone who would be captured, humiliated, and executed by the very oppressors he was supposed to overthrow. This vision of a suffering Messiah simply doesn't fit into the narrative of salvation they had known. The suffering and death of Jesus on the cross seem, to many, like the final proof that he couldn't be the Messiah. Additionally, the idea that the Messiah should suffer for the sins of the people is something that many do not understand. Jewish tradition has its own rituals for atonement, its own ways of reconciling with God through the temple, sacrifices, and prayers. The notion that the death of one person, even if that person were the Messiah, could be the ultimate sacrifice that brings forgiveness to all was a radical idea, almost incomprehensible to most. The cross, a symbol of defeat and shame, becomes the hardest point to accept. Many Jews saw it as the definitive proof that Jesus was not the promised Messiah. A Messiah who dies at the hands of the Romans, without restoring Israel, without bringing victory. To many, this was a scandal and impossibility. The suffering and death of Jesus, instead of being seen as signs of redemption, were viewed as a tragedy that only reinforced the belief that the true Messiah had not yet come. And in the midst of all this, the religious leaders play a crucial role. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and teachers of the law see themselves as guardians of the Jewish faith and tradition. They have studied the scriptures for years, dedicating their lives to interpreting and applying the laws of Moses. When Jesus begins to gain followers and make messianic claims, they see him as a threat to what they believe is the true faith. These religious leaders expected a Messiah who would respect the law and traditions, someone who would fulfill the expectations that had been shaped over centuries. But Jesus challenges many of those expectations. He heals on the Sabbath, questions their authority, and surrounds himself with people that religious society considered unclean. He teaches that the kingdom of God is not something that can be rigidly controlled or defined by the law, but something living and dynamic, based on love and mercy. For the Pharisees and Sadducees, these actions not only challenge their authority but also threaten religious and social stability. With the people living under Roman occupation, any movement that causes unrest is dangerous. They fear that Jesus' actions and teachings could incite a revolt and bring even harsher repression from Rome. Moreover, his words about the kingdom of God and his own divinity seem to undermine everything they believe to be fundamental to the Jewish faith. There's also a political aspect to all of this. The religious leaders had found a way to coexist with Roman power, maintaining a fragile peace that allowed them to continue practicing their faith. But Jesus, with his growing popularity and bold claims, threatens this delicate balance. If the people begin to follow him en masse, it could provoke a violent response from the Romans, something the religious leaders are desperate to avoid. And so, instead of seeing Jesus as the expected Messiah, they see him as an impostor, someone who could destroy everything that has been built over centuries. To them, rejecting Jesus isn't just a matter of faith. It's a matter of survival of their traditions, their people, and their own authority. And so, the story continues to this day. While Jesus became the Messiah for millions of Christians around the world, many Jews still wait for the one they believe to be the true Messiah. The hope has not died. It has simply taken a different path. For the Jewish people, the Messiah is still to come. He will be the king who brings peace to a world devastated by war, who restores justice where there is oppression, and who, at last, will unite all nations under the banner of divine peace. The ancient prophecies continue to be read and studied, and the faith in a future Redeemer remains alive. Over the centuries, this hope has endured, even in the face of great tragedies like the destruction of the temple, the exiles, the persecutions, and the Holocaust. Each generation looks to the future with the same expectation. The Messiah is still to come. He will bring a time of restoration when the entire world will know the true God, and justice and peace will finally prevail. For many Jews, the coming of the Messiah won't just be the fulfillment of ancient promises, but also the realization of a deep yearning for redemption that has sustained their identity for millennia. This ongoing belief reflects the strength of a tradition that, despite all challenges and changes, still holds on to the hope of something greater, something that one day will bring true peace to Israel and to the entire world. And so, the waiting continues. They watch, still looking to the horizon, still believing that the Messiah will come, and when he does, he will bring with him the era of peace and justice that God promised from the beginning of time.